Have you ever experienced a flight disruption or minor turbulence that leaves you terrified during a flight, feeling like it could go south from there? Well, it's mostly the same when the plane crashes, only that it involves chaos, misery, destruction, and lives lost. Every country has suffered this tragedy at some point, but India by far has been one of the unluckiest. Ranking 13th out of 207 countries based on the number of plane crashes, with a shocking 99 plane crashes, India has experienced several air tragedies, with some being much worse. Here are the 10 deadliest of them in India's history. Number 10. United Arab Airlines Flight 869. It's July 28, 1963, and United Arab Airlines Flight 869, an international scheduled passenger de Havilland Comet 4C, is taking off from Tokyo, Japan, to Cairo via Hong Kong and Bombay, now called Mumbai, and Bahrain. What was supposed to be a peaceful flight, as it's always been, will forever be remembered as a tragedy. One that, to this day, will only be surrounded by speculations of what could have gone wrong. What did go wrong? The Comet crew reports being overhead the Santa Cruz VOR beacon at about 7,000 feet, and has just been cleared to descend to 4,000 feet. However, the controller advises they might encounter heavy turbulence if they go more than 6 or even 7 miles west of the airport. The crew on board Flight 869 instead requests a left-hand procedure, a rare decision considering the right-hand procedure is the standard protocol. The controller grants this permission, and the plane, already in severe turbulence, enters a left-hand turn, and that right there is when tragedy strikes. The aircraft tragically crashes into the sea, 9 nautical miles from Maud Island. Time, 1:50 a.m. All it took was 4 minutes. 4 minutes for 55 passengers and 8 crew members to be no more. To this day, the cause of the crash is still unknown. Severe turbulence? Heavy rain? Or was there something more? Well, not every crash is a mystery. In a lot of cases, you have the crew to blame. And this takes us to our next story. Number 9. Indian Airlines Flight 257. August 16, 1991. It's 11:54 a.m., and Flight 257 is taking off from Calcutta to Imphal, the capital of Manipur. Captain Sekhar Heldar is the pilot, and Captain Roy Chaudhary is his co-pilot. The flight should take only 60 minutes before continuing its journey to Dimapur. What could possibly go wrong? 12:45 p.m., 4,900 feet in the air, right after landing at Imphal and continuing to Dimapur, the ATC loses all contact with a crew of Flight 257. Almost immediately, there's panic. Several other flights constantly try to contact Flight 257, but nothing. It seemed like the aircraft had just disappeared off the face of the earth. 10 minutes after, at 12:55 p.m., a full emergency is declared on the aircraft. A few hours later, several villagers reported that the aircraft had crashed somewhere in the Tangjing Hill Range. Flight 257 slams head-on onto the slope of the hill. Bodies can be seen around the wreckage. 69. That's the number of passengers and crew members on board. That's the number of casualties. Unfortunately, no one survived. On the 30th of April, 1992, 8 months after the accident, it was confirmed by flight recordings that the crash occurred because of an error on the part of the pilot in command in not following the operational flight plan. Did you know that as much as 69.1% of general aviation accidents are actually caused by pilot errors? And unfortunately, the 8th crash still follows this statistic, but with its own twist. Number 8. Japan Airlines Flight 471. June 14, 1972. Flight 471 is on the Bangkok-New Delhi portion of its Tokyo-London route, taking flight from Don Mueang International Airport in Bangkok, Thailand at 11:21 UTC to Palam International Airport, now Indira Gandhi International Airport in New Delhi, India. About 3 hours later, at 2:43 UTC, the flight is given clearance for a straight-in ILS approach to runway 28. But an easy landing became so much more. The plane, devoid of any real external interference, just crashes right into the banks of the Yamuna River not long after the 23-mile report from the distance measuring equipment. The exact cause of this misfortune still varies. Japanese investigators pointed to the possibility of a false glide slope leading to the crash. Indian investigators, on the other hand, claimed that it was a pilot error, particularly the captain ignoring instrument indications and not having a clear sight of the runway. Out of the 89 people on board the plane, 86 lives were tragically lost, not to mention the 4 ground casualties. Number 7. Indian Airlines Flight 605. Flight 605 took off from Bombay Airport at 11:58 local time on February 14, 1990, after about an hour of delay. Its destination was Bangalore. Before this particular flight, the aircraft, an Airbus 320-231 registered as VTEPN, had already been used for 2 other flights. 139 passengers, including 4 children and 7 crew members, are on board. Everything is going as smoothly as it could go. The takeoff and en route phases proceed normally. At 12:53 local time, Flight 605's radar plot appears on Bangalore's radar, meaning that landing is imminent. The crew disengages the autopilot and changes to the Bangalore Tower. And that's when, just mere moments away from safe landing, comes disaster. As 605 attempts to land, the pilot flies far below the glide scope, and the landing gear crashes right into the grounds of the Karnataka Golf Club, 2,800 feet from the airport, before flying over a road and into a grassy, rocky area still pretty close to the airport. 92 lives were lost in that crash, including both captains on board. Luckily, however, up to 54 people survived, although they were severely injured. This crash drew criticism from the Indian Commercial Pilot Association, which claimed that the Airbus A320 had some major flaws. They were proved right less than 2 years later, as another A320 accident occurred under similar circumstances, which eventually led to further design improvements to flight control. So what does that leave us with? Lives that could have been saved. Number 6. Alitalia Flight 771. Having a pilot who's familiar with a particular flight route has its advantages, and it might have taken a deadly plane crash for people to figure that out. July 7, 1962, Alitalia Flight 771, a multi-leg Douglas DC-843 International, is scheduled to fly from Sydney via Darwin, Bangkok, Bombay, Karachi, and Tehran to Rome. The flight starts with just 45 passengers in Sydney and takes on more passengers on the stops to Darwin and Singapore. While departing Bangkok at 3:16 UTC, the load sheet records 94 people aboard Flight 771. However, the flight plan isn't signed by the pilot in command, 50-year-old veteran Captain Quatrin, a violation of usual operations. Could this be a problem later on? At 5:20, the first communications are made with Bombay Flight Information Center requesting the weather forecast for landing. At 6:20, an hour later, the flight is now switched to Bombay approach frequency and requests to begin descending. 771 initiates descent at 6:24 UTC, descending from 35,000 feet to 20,000 feet. At 6:38, 771 reaches an altitude of 5,000 feet. The flight plan provided by Alitalia prescribed a 100-mile descent to Bombay or Mumbai in 13 minutes. The flight continues descending further to 3,600 feet, well below the minimum safety altitude of 9,000 feet. The last anyone hears of Flight 771 is at 6:39. The aircraft crashes right into Davandiachi Hill on the bearing of 240 degrees. The DC-8 is completely destroyed, and everyone aboard perishes. Later on, investigators explore several probable causes: the pilot's unfamiliarity with the route, navigational errors, and failure to maintain the recommended altitude. This isn't the only time Mumbai has been the site of an aircraft tragedy. And that leads us right into the next crash. Number 5. Indian Airlines Flight 171. What are the odds of an emergency landing becoming an emergency? On October 12, 1976, Flight 171, a Caravel, scheduled flight from Bombay, now Mumbai, to Madras, now Chennai. Initially, this flight was to be made using a Boeing aircraft, but there was engine trouble, so a Sud Aviation Caravel was used instead. The aircraft takes to the skies from runway 27, and shortly after, it happens. A number 2 engine failure rocks Flight 171. The crew, now aware of the present danger, turned back to make an emergency landing. With its undercarriage down 1,000 yards from the end of the runway, while at an altitude of 300 feet, The aircraft suffers a loss of control and plummets into the ground. Everyone flying on Flight 171 that day died. The cause of this devastating misfortune was a fatigue crack in the 10th stage compressor disc. Number 4. Indian Airlines Flight 113. It's 6:05 Indian Standard Time in Mumbai on October 19, 1988. Flight 113 departs Mumbai. Destination, Ahmedabad. Exactly 15 minutes later, at 6:20, the crew contacts Ahmedabad Approach Control. The MEDAR, which is basically weather information, is transmitted to the crew aboard due to the reduced visibility from 6 to 3 kilometers. 6:32. Clearance to descend to approximately 15,000 feet is given, and the crew is advised to report when 113 is 1,700 feet overhead the Ahmedabad VHF omnidirectional range. At 6:47 Indian Standard Time, the pilot approaches runway 23 and reports overhead of Ahmedabad. The aircraft then goes outbound and reports turning inbound precisely 3 minutes later. This is the last transmission ATC gets from Flight 113. Descending at about 160 knots, which is about 180 miles per hour, the flight crew wouldn't see clearance for landing. The cockpit voice recorder conversation between the co-pilot and pilot showed one thing: anxiety, as they both focused on trying to pick out the runway and lost track of their altitude. At 6:53, Flight 113 goes headfirst into trees and a high-tension electricity transmission tower, and crashes on the outskirts of Chiloda-Kurarpur village. The crash site is 2,540 meters from runway 23. 129 passengers, as well as 6 crew members, perished in the crash. There were survivors, 5 of them, but 3 eventually succumbed to their wounds. India eventually concluded the cause of the crash: an error of judgment on the part of the pilot in command associated with poor visibility. You'll be shocked at how many plane crashes occur on the runway. The next crash is quite identical to this, and that takes us to our top 3. Number 3. Air India Express Flight 812. On May 22, 2010, Flight 812 departed Dubai International Airport at 9:06 in the evening. At 12:35 a.m., Flight 812 crashed upon reaching Mangalore International Airport. Touching down on runway 24, the plane overran and immediately went crashing down the hill at its end. Situated on a hilly region of India, the airport is one of 7 designated as a critical airfield by the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. Therefore, only the captain may pilot an aircraft during landing and takeoff. The last conversations between the crew and air traffic control prior to the crash indicated no distress at all. The cause of the crash was due to overrunning the runway. But what's really strange is that both pilots on 812 had experience with this airport. Captain Glusika had landed at Mangalore 16 times, while First Officer Alwalia 66 times. So what happened this time? With 158 lives lost and 8 others severely injured, this is the 3rd deadliest plane crash in Indian history. Number 2. Air India Flight 855. What could be more devastating than a completely unavoidable crash? A moment where you can turn to no one as you count the seconds to your end. That's the story behind Air India Flight 855, a scheduled passenger flight from Bombay, now Mumbai, India, to Dubai, United Arab Emirates. 855 departs Bombay's Santa Cruz Airport, now called Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport. Destination, Dubai International Airport in Dubai. A minute past takeoff, Captain Kukar makes a scheduled right turn upon crossing the Bombay coastline over the Arabian Sea, before the aircraft returns to normal level position. Soon after, tragedy strikes, taking its time. 855 begins rolling to the left on its own, never regaining level flight. The cockpit voice recorder recovered revealed that Captain Kukar was the first to realize a problem, when he said, "What's happened here? My instruments." The captain explains that his altitude indicator, or AI, had toppled, meaning that it still showed the aircraft in a right bank. Just 101 seconds after 855 leaves the runway, it takes a nosedive right into the Arabian Sea at an estimated 35-degree angle. 190 passengers and 23 crew members, but not a single soul survived. Concluded investigations proved the probable cause was due to the inept control inputs by the pilot, following complete unawareness of the altitude as his AI had malfunctioned. The plane crash remained the deadliest in Indian history right until November 12, 1996. And with that, the worst day in Indian aviation history. Number 1. The Charkhi-Dadri mid-air collision. What we're about to witness isn't only the deadliest plane crash in Indian history, but also the world's deadliest mid-air collision. It honestly doesn't get any darker or more tragic than this. 6:32 local time, November 12, 1996. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 departs Delhi. Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, at the same time, descends to land in Delhi. Both flights are controlled by approach controller VK Dutta. Moments after takeoff, Flight 763 is cleared to a starting altitude of 10,000 feet. At 6:34, Dutta clears Flight 1907 to drop to 15,000 feet when it's 74 nautical miles from the beacon of the destination airport. At 6:36, 2 minutes later, Dutta clears 763, traveling on the same airway but in the opposite direction to ascend to 14,000 feet. At 6:39, Flight 1907 reports reaching its assigned altitude of 15,000 feet. However, it was higher and still descending. And in there lies the start of this disaster. At this time, Dutta advises the flight, identified traffic at 12 o'clock, reciprocal, Saudia Boeing 747 at 10 miles, likely to cross in another 5 miles, report if in sight. 6:40 p.m., just a minute later, the crew of a U.S. Air Force cargo flight makes a radio call saying they've seen a big explosion at 2 o'clock. Dutta immediately tried contacting both flights, but there was nothing. The worst had already happened. Both aircraft collide. The left wing of the 1907 sliced through the left wing of the 763. The crippled Saudia Boeing quickly loses control and goes into a rapidly descending spiral with fire trailing from its wing and breaks up mid-air before crashing into the ground at near supersonic speed. Flight 1907, with most of its left wing and vertical stabilizer damaged, goes into a flat spin and crashes into a field near the wreckage of the Saudia plane. All 312 people on board Flight 763 and the 37 people on Flight 1907 were killed. The cause of India's deadliest aviation tragedy? Failure of Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907's captain to follow ATC directives, whether due to cloud turbulence or communication problems. A tragic day that will be remembered throughout aviation history. A tragic tale that brings our video to an end. As we conclude our video, we remember the lives lost and lessons learned from these tragedies. We also honor the sheer bravery of the flight crews and even the survivors. If you found this video informative, you'll enjoy watching our next video.